All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing our tafsir. Of course, we were doing these ayat yesterday, and we kind of went into a number of different areas of how we understand tafsir, how these people, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was telling us about the lifestyle that they had lived, and this really pays regardless of what religion you are, even if a person is Christian, the type of lifestyle that they would live is either going to get them closer to Allah or distant away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just keep this one in mind. Because you would see those that are probably living a lifestyle of being devout, they are closer even to the practices of Islam, and even practices of spirituality. You would see that when they give up on dunya, give up on so many different things of course, in entertainment, that you would see, well, wow, this is exactly like what Islam says, etc. And you will be I guess, amazed, and sometimes even, you know, it really looks very attractive to many. And of course, certainly the ayah was emphasizing, well, some of them qasisina wa ruhbana, they were living a certain life, they were not arrogant. This type of lifestyle got them into having, I guess, that akhlaq, the adab, and that adab led them to finding إذا سمعوا ما أنزل إلى الرسول ترى أعينهم تفيض من الدمع. And one thing we said, that yes, the ayat were telling us about their character, a certain word that they were saying, a certain character they were living in, a certain lifestyle they were practicing, and how later on there's a certain sound that was influencing their ears. They were listening to the words of the Prophet ﷺ, listening to the words of the ayat that were revealed, and certainly they were moved by that. Their eyes were moved because they had definitely been influenced, and they were capable of, I guess, embracing that dhikr, and embracing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they did not have arrogance. They were practicing this devout lifestyle throughout their life, and it came in handy and certainly in their favor to really see dhikr. And we talked about that dhikr also, just as any other emotion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was definitely telling us about the emotions, perhaps, of tara a'yunuhum. You would see their eyes filling with tears. You would see, again, we would also look into other ayat where it was talking about that they would have goosebumps on their body. And we talked about that, and what it actually meant to really have these feelings that are basically expressed in certain ways, to show the sound of it, to show the effect of it. And I forgot to mention one thing. I did talk about, of course, the appearance, and we talked about how certain emotions they go from silent to having probably a facial expression, perhaps blood pressure changing, and the list goes on and on to what changes you would find in the body. And certainly we would see also sometimes a sound of it. I forgot to mention the sound of khushu'. So what we did talk about things that we would see, facial expressions, whether it's ترى أعينهم تفيض من الدم. We would look at their skin, which basically is telling us the influence of khushu' affecting to every, I guess, cell in their body, which basically is skin, and affecting their khushu', well, basically affecting every single cell in their body, to another part, which is, well, is there such a thing that it also has sound? And as I was going over what I was saying, I forgot to mention that yes, there is a sound for khushu', unlike unlike, for example, uh, well, not unlike, but similar to the sounds of different emotions as well. What is that sound for khushu'? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam as awahun halim. Awahun halim. When you look at awah, halim is clear, forbearant. But awah is actually an onomatopoeia. It's not really a word that is in itself, I guess, taking a certain definition. It's a word that comes from the sound of it. So it just like when you say meow, for example, okay, that's trying to mimic the sound of what a cat does. Aware it's a word in Arabic that is trying to mimic the sound of what he was doing. Aware, what was that? That he was crying often of dhikr, and the cries and the tears would not be silent, but he would have a sound that while he was tearing of dhikr, it would be making a sound of somewhat of an ta'awwah. It's a sound of pain. It's a sound of fear. It's a sound where, of course, you could see that there is a certain pressure, that it would be pressuring the person whenever they're going to, think of somebody when they're crying and when they're pressuring themselves to not scream, but then they're pressuring themselves not to scream, but they're making a sound that is really trapped air inside the body, trapped noises inside the body, and that's التأوه. That's التأوه. So when the ayat were describing him as awahun halim, it was basically describing the sound of dhikr, the sound of khushu'. So just as we were talking about how emotions would be silent in the beginning and would have a sound once they grow stronger, it's important to also see that, yes, certainly there is a sound for the level of khushu' as well, just as there's also a facial expression that you would see on a person's eyes, in a certain bodily changes, whether we're looking at goosebumps or even hearts trembling. And I think I talked about Ryan Newberg some while back. I talked about Ryan Newberg and that neurologist, who's a Jewish agnostic Jew, really, but he was doing studies about on what really happens to the the human brain when it speaks in tongues or is religious and continues to do prayer, and how does it influence the brain? And he was talking about how it lightens in the brain in a certain way, and the person and what they were capable of seeing on the scans was that the person that is constantly and consistently doing dhikr, whether it's dhikr to mean Muslim dhikr, or whether it's a Christian, or whether it's a Jew, or whether it's a shaman, whatever religion this person is practicing, that they were capable of seeing that there's a certain effect on the brain. Really interesting to see that. Does it come with tears? Yes, التأوه, it can come with tears, but of course we know that tears uh, would actually be in the beginning. Tears in advanced situations, they dry out. So let's say a person is extremely sad, they would cry, but there's no more tears. There are no tears. But a person that is sad, the tears would come out, but once they are, that's why they would say جف الدمع. When does الدمع يجف? When do the tears dry? The tears dry, it's not that there's no more fluid inside. No, it's not that there's no more fluid inside. It's that the person reached the highest level. The highest level in their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they're not tearing, but they're actually feeling that inner pressure. They are feeling, and that's why you're looking at التأوه. التأوه usually, it can contain tears with it, but it's because التأوه is more describing the sound of al-khushu'. There can be tears, but there could also be no tears, because what the tears do, they basically help the person reduce from the inner pressure. That's what the tears do. They basically reduce from the inner pressure to give the person some sort of relief. But once the person, I guess, had gone to the climax of their anger, or the climax of their sadness, etc., you would see their tears were dried. The pressure was beyond, and subhanallah, and for those that would lose a loved one, just to keep in mind, they would actually live, I know it's a little off subject, but those that would lose a loved one, they would actually go into a moment where certainly they completely lost tears, and they would cry, but there's no, you don't see any tears usually. And the person that's crying with no tears is usually the most one to really have the deepest sorrow. And they would also live in a moment of denial. Why would they live in a moment of denial? Well, that's a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you're living in denial, your brain is giving you, I guess, fake news that this didn't happen, just to calm you down until you get adjusted to the situation. Yes, it's lying to you. And because it couldn't find any other way to absorb this information, so it would tell you, oh, don't worry, it's a lie, it's not real, they're going to come back to life. And this person is like, oh, okay, all right. And this person lives in denial, and that's what comforts them. And that's their way of, I guess, learning how to accommodate and adapt to the new situation. Sometimes living a lie. Yes, they're not dead. They're going to come back to life. We're adapting to it. And that's why the people that lose somebody, and I guess doing chaplaincy and always invited to people's aza and stuff, you would see that um, people are more influenced, and they recognize the sadness and the situation, not within the 3 days or within the early times. They more get into the sorrow, and the sorrow tends to get stronger, perhaps after a week or 2 weeks. That's when they recognize it's real. It's real. They're not there anymore. It's taking longer than expected. And subhanallah, I mean, the most ones that I had seen were probably influenced and not given the attention that they deserve in order to give them the proper support are really the widows. Widows are perhaps emotionally, they're the most ones to be influenced by this. Orphans in the beginning, but then orphans, parents are more of supporters. They don't usually recognize the parent and their place. Maybe perhaps for younger children, the mother, of course, they all of a sudden go into a type of trauma that what if I lose someone else? What if this? And they definitely would feel that. But then children, they can adapt to new circumstances and forget the old situation, or at least the old circumstance. And it's, of course, the younger you are, the faster you're capable of forgetting and adapting to something new. And the older you are, you still have it right there wired in your brain. But of course, when it comes to widows, definitely, they're the most ones that I had seen, um, that I had seen were probably the most ones in pain, because this person is one, especially if there was a love relationship between the husband and the wife. If there is a love relationship between the husband and the wife, women are a lot more loyal than men. I'll say it straightforward. Men, it's not that they're not loyal. Believe it or not, I mean, studies actually say that men die after their wives are, or would die after the death of their wives sooner, and women are capable of living longer after the death of their husbands, ironically. But women tend to find it harder to adjust finding a new companion, a new man. They don't adjust to finding a new companion as easy as the man. Okay, she's dead, time to move on in life and remarry. But for a woman, it's not just the children, but it's just an issue of just feeling that no one can replace this person in my heart. And then she would just stay feeling that I can't. There's no way that I can live this new person and have anybody else take the role of someone that is wired in my brain somehow. It's really strange. I was also, I love neuroscience. Remember that always. And it was this neuroscientist was actually talking about a relationship between a man and a woman, and how there is, with intimacy, that there's a part of that DNA that goes into the brain through semen and basically stamps on the woman's brain. So it basically has a stamp on the brain, and it's really quite interesting. I don't know how to say it in their, I guess, scientific terminology, but that's how they were describing it. And subhanallah, and it was actually talking about that it goes beyond. We would think of perhaps semen being trapped just in the area of, I guess, a reproductive system. But they were saying, these neuroscientists were saying that what studies are showing, that it actually has a longer influence, a longer impact, where it even affects the brain and affects the woman's brain, not only when, of course, reaching a certain climax, but it also affects the brain and how she would feel connected, feeling somehow that she needs to be obedient, etc. That it becomes as if you're putting a certain stamp on the brain, and it basically takes time to wear off. And it's quite interesting when you look at the time of iddah. The time of iddah, 4 months and 10 days. The timing, we definitely cannot explain whatsoever. Why the 10 days? Why 4 months and 10 days? That would be interesting to really do a study and perhaps continue the study to really see where is there any correlation between what was said, the stamping on the brain, and the influence it basically has in how we would adjust to a new system and our ability to, I guess, start a new life. How do we get into this moment of therapy kind of thing? Is because Islam definitely tells us that this moment of iddah, that a woman is supposed to not dress up in terms of beautification, is not supposed to be going into, I guess, a moment of entertainment, going outside of her home, unless there was a necessity. That's a different story. But she's supposed to be basically staying within the home. And you would usually think that what would actually make a good therapy is to go out, probably traveling, to probably go out and meet new people and just kind of get yourself busy with other things. But that's not what Islam considers the therapy for the moment of the loss of a loved one, or at least the moment of that moment of trying to get into a therapy for a widow. So if we're looking at any other person, if they lost their father, their mother, etc., the moment of for, I guess, mourning is only going to be for 3 days, no longer. But a widow's mourning is going to be for 4 months and 10 days. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ. He's the one that created even every single detail inside our body, and therefore he's the one that is subtle and he knows what is best for us. So at the end, how is this supposed to be therapy for the widow, who's definitely perhaps the most one that people don't recognize is mourning, and is probably the most one to be in the deepest sorrow. And it definitely doesn't help to see how the media would portray a widow as nothing but a bad omen. So definitely, just taking that moment to realize how, one, the culture, the media portrays a woman that is a widow in a certain way, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting that mourning be a time for her therapy to just absorb the situation, to adjust to the situation, to be prepared for a new start. So you're trapping her. Literally, it's trapping. You're trapping the woman inside her home for 4 months and 10 days, and literally telling her not to dress up, not to put any makeup, not to put any sign of beautification, not eyeliner, nothing of that sort. Doesn't mean you would have to wear black, certainly not. You don't have to wear black. It's not an issue of what color. It's an issue of, well, if this is a sign of beautification, we want you to stop it. A moment of 4 months and 10 days to feel that you're trapped. That way, it would give you a moment of therapy that you would look towards the end of this time to a new start. To a new start. It's like, no, I'm going to trap you right there. And that way, you'll look to a new start. Yes, it's probably going to make you feel trapped. It doesn't feel good, but certainly the outcome is going to be in your favor, because you're going to want to feel that you're excited about a new start, a fresh start, and ready to continue to adapt and continue with your life. I know we definitely got out of this. But that's the nice thing about tafsir sometimes. It just takes you, I know, Noura, like 10 days are related to fiqh. Well, of course, the 10 days related to fiqh, the 4 months and 10 days, that's an ayah in the Quran. That's an ayah in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically obligated. It's a religion. It's a ibadah. The mourning for 4 months and 10 days, it's a ibadah. Can you imagine that this is ibadah?
But why 9, 10, not 9, not 11?
Well, that's the thing. Allahu a'lam. ألا يعلم من خلقه هو اللطيف الخبير. We don't really know, and that's why I said it would be really interesting to perhaps, go further in neurological studies and neuroscience and really see, is there anything related? Is there anything related to a different system? Maybe it's not neuroscience that is going to be figuring this out and the hikmah and the wisdom behind it. Maybe a different field. Maybe something else that is, I don't know which field is going to be figuring this out. But at the end, ألا يعلم من خلق وهو اللطيف الخبير. خلاص. We don't really know. It's ibadah.
There
That's
is
it.
wisdom. Okay.
Yeah,
For Ibrahim alayhi salam, when you said that he is awah, and you focus on sadness and stuff like that, does Ibrahim alayhi salam was live in sadness to be awah?
Okay, so it's not sadness. His ta'awwuh was not because he was sad about, I don't know, sad about his father, throwing him in the fire, or he's sad about maybe him not getting any children and being barren for a long time. That wasn't the reason why he was described as awah, or that wasn't what he was praised for. Absolutely not. Because sabr is something sabr is something that you're praised for, that you're adapting, you're embracing the situations that are probably harming you physically or harming you psychologically. Just like when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had praised Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانِ. How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describe him? As somebody that was living فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. But was he crying? Was he living a sense of emotion of deep sorrow over the loss of his son? Absolutely, to the point that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said, وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that his eyes turned white. In other words, whether it's developed cataract or who knows exactly, at the end, the anxiety, the depression, although he was living for sabrun jameel, but his body was going through the anxiety, and I guess absorbing the anxiety differently, to the point that his body was not capable of adapting, and I guess embracing the whole idea of the loss of his son. His body couldn't handle it, and he lost his sight. So it manifested in a different way. I guess the pressure, the sadness manifested in a different way. It basically affected his sight. Was it because he was constantly crying, or was it that, no, it's the anxiety manifests in different ways. Some people, perhaps they can't walk. Other people, they probably cannot talk. They're all of a sudden just basically just mute. Other people might lose their sight. Other people might get a heart attack. Each one basically their body displays their inability to absorb the situation differently. And subhanAllah, but when you look at Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, awahun halim, was not because of sorrow over the situation, but it was describing the tears of khushu'. That's two different things. Tears of khushu' or the sound of khushu' is different than when I'm sad because I didn't get any children. I had been married for 80 some years and no sign of children to take care of me as an older person, etc. And that was Prophet Ibrahim, because you want to remember that 80 some years, he didn't have any children. And that's when, I guess, Sarah introduces her own concubine and says, well, get married to her, get children through her, and then gets Ismail alayhi salam. But then, even though he was pretty and very happy about getting Ismail, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders him to basically put Ismail alayhi salam in the land of Mecca or the land of Mecca. So now he's going alone again. And now, now a new miracle happens, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him a son through Sarah, who was already a 70 plus year old woman, so definitely went through menopause, is definitely not going to be getting any children. But when the Malaika come over and they basically tell Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam that he was going to get a child, and she said, "Ajuzun aqim, this is impossible." But they were telling her that no, you were the one that's going to be getting the child. فَصَكَّتْ وَجْهَهَا وَقَالَتْ عَجُوزٌ aqim. She just slapped her face and said, "Oh, how's that even possible?" And she felt that that was going to be more than what her body can handle. And they just said, no, this is an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whenever He decrees something, that's it. إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُنْ فَيَكُونُ. How is that going to be demonstrated? What is going to happen, etc.? What is, I guess, the whole hikmah from this? That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell them, well, you just have to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has His wisdom in things, and you just have to recognize that you may not have all the details of why things may function in a certain way and how things unfold. You just have to redirect your vision, redirect your focus from seeing that things are supposed to be in a certain order to recognizing that you don't control the order, that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that controls the order, that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that redirects things towards good. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all khair, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is good, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would only be conducting what is just, what is good for you, etc. So you would have that complete faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Alim Al-Khabir, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the all-knowing, and therefore He would give us what is in our favor, because we would have that complete dependence on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even when things may appear that the data doesn't look in our, that it's going in our favor. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, just live the principle. And He promises that just live the principle, and from where you would not expect, that victory, success would actually come in your favor. That's why the ayah, وَلَكِنَّكُمْ تَسْتَعْجِلُونَ, the Prophet ﷺ said. You would just rush to get to the conclusion, to get to the results. And if only you were patient, you would say, الشجاعة صبر ساعة. Shaja'a, courage, is basically just an issue of minute. It's just a shaja'a sabr sa'a. It's being patient for an hour, because that's when you would basically be getting the result in your favor. Just don't rush picking the fruits. And that's why in fiqh we would say, من استعجل الشيء قبل أوانه عوقب بحرمانه. In fiqh we would say, if you, let me write that down, right? Let's write that down. من استعجل. So do we write it down? Let's write it down. من استعجل الشيء قبل أوانه عوقب بحرمانه. What does that mean? If you rush taking something before its time for it, then we would punish you by taking it away from you. That's not only in fiqh, but that's the same thing in life. If you pick the fruits before they are ripe, then you're not going to have the real fruit. Don't rush in getting to the results of things. Sometimes just let things take their time. As women, I think we rush often. Men are more pragmatic. I'm not saying all men, but more pragmatic, giving things the course. But this is, generally speaking. But I see often that women, when they would come to me, and she says she wants a divorce, I want it now. I can't handle. No. I can't, it's beyond my ability to handle the situation. I want to divorce right now. Or when she wants to get married. Believe it or not, I remember I was ready to give a dars. I literally go to the masjid. I'm preparing my laptop, setting everything up and everything. A woman comes to me and brings over this man, African American man, and she says, "Can you do the marriage contract for me?" I was really confused. I was like, "Can I do the marriage what does that mean?" She's like, "I need to get married right now." She was all dressed up, and the man was all dressed up, parked in the parking lot. And I said, "What man and what marriage and what's going on here? I thought you were married." And she said, yeah, but I divorced the other husband and now I'm ready to start a fresh start. I said, "Did you finish your iddah?" She said, "Yeah, I finished my iddah and I'm ready to start." I said, "Is that guy even Muslim?" She said, yes. He's ready to do his shahada right now. Ready to do his shahada right now. So the guy didn't even get into the practice of Islam. So like he's ready to do his shahada right now, and we want to do the marriage contract right now. I said, "Sorry, sister, things are not to be done this way. We have to make sure, one, verify this person's Islam. Two, this method of I want to get married right now, I want to get divorced right now, this way of doing things is definitely why Islam obligated that you would have a wali to slow you down from taking impulsive decisions that are not in your favor." Did you do a background check? Yes, I've been talking to him for quite a while. Right? That's your background check. That you've been talking to him for quite a while. You've been talking to him while you were married to another guy? While you were on your iddah? Are you serious? That's right there. من استعجل الشيء قبل أوانه يعوقب بحرمانه. I said, I'm not going to do anything. من استعجل الشيء. You rush into wanting things. Guess what? She found someone else and got married to this guy, found someone else to basically do the marriage contract and got divorced. Faster than you would think. A month later, faster than you would think. Absolutely. This is going to be a normal consequence. And I see this all the time. When women want to get married, they want to do it right now. When they want to get divorced, right now. Want to rush everything.
And I was so hesitant.
SubhanAllah, I mean, I would see most women want to rush things because they would just get, I guess, this adrenaline that's it, I can't handle it. And then they would live in this mode that I need to end this because my brain is telling me that I can't handle it. So what do? They basically want to end things or start things as soon as possible. All right, let's go out, I guess, out of all of this. فأثابهم الله بما قالوا جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها وذلك جزاء المحسنين. We went into details about فأثابهم الله بما قالوا, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them as a result of what they had said, and certainly as a result of what a person had said is important to keep in mind, that you may say a word. Remember when in the early surah, in the early parts in tafsir for Surah al-Maida, that they had said اذهب أنت وربك فقاتلا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said فإنها محرمة عليهم 40 سنة يتيهون في الأرض. And that's the same thing. You could see that those people, they basically said اذهب أنت وربك فقاتلا, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said فإنها محرمة عليهم. Simple as that. Because of what they had said, and for whatever they had basically for what they had mentioned in their words to show an objection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, they were punished, those people were punished for what they had said in a way to demonstrate their objection to the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in contrast to that, because of what these people had said, فَأَثَابَهُمُ اللَّهُ بِمَا قَالُوا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them the reward for what they had said, جَنَّات. And what are those جَنَّات? تَجْرِي مِن تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارِ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا. Flowing rivers underneath. And we talked about the flowing rivers and how water in the Quran is associating water as a sign of a living thing. And وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ. It's not only a sign of living thing, but it's also a sign of abundance of, I guess, the different things that will bring about life. خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا, they would be living there eternally. So أَثَابَهُمْ بِمَا قَالُوا. Just look at the correlation between what a person would say, and sometimes you may say something and not realize that you had said it. Just like Prophet Yusuf عليه salam. He just said, السجن أحب إلي مما يدعونني إليه. Did he actually make a dua? It wasn't a dua, but he just said, السجن أحب إلي. Prison would be better for me than what they're inviting me to. You might say something and not realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was taking your words seriously. And that's why it's important to train ourselves in how we utter things and what we say. Taking long moments of silence is important, because if you are not silent, for sure, you're going to say things that are not in your favor, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking your words into account. So look at this one. And subhanAllah, I would also say, ladies, we are more susceptible to making wrong statements than men because of the anatomy that our brain is created. Speech areas on the left side, and we speak, and we usually, we use the left side. Only very few women use it the other way around, and certainly we learn language faster. We speak faster. Oh, well, I mean, I don't mean in speed in how we say things, but we're faster to express ourselves. We're faster to say and express our emotions. You see it, girls, we're ready to speak at any time. But for men, of course, their anatomy is different. It would take them time to express. And, that's very common that women would contact me and say, my husband's angry and I don't know why. I'm like, yeah, don't worry, this is common. He probably doesn't even know why himself. He doesn't know how to express it, but he's angry about something for sure. Just give it time. It'll come out somehow. And he'll tell you what he's angry about. And sometimes they don't even know, men, sometimes they may not even know how to express themselves to why they're angry and what they're angry about. And they just don't know how to say it. They just don't know how to express themselves. And even when they approach one another, they don't do a lot of talking. There's a lot of eyes that are skeptic of one another, looking at each other. They'll just, Assalamu alaikum. That's if they said it even. And sit down. But for women, Assalamu alaikum, where are you from? You're looking great. Oh, wallahi, you know what? I love what you're wearing, and etc. And now she's ready to start a conversation. But for men, how about exchanging phone numbers? Don't do that. Why? Because you're exposing yourself too much. You're supposed to stay somewhat strong, even if you fake it. But you have to fake it to make it. So yes, we won't exchange phone numbers. We won't go in prolonged conversations, because by speaking in prolonged conversations, you're exposing too much of yourself and too much of how you basically express yourself, and etc. And Noura saying, I don't agree. Personalities are different. Yeah, personalities are different, but we're looking at statistics here. We're talking about the majority. We're not talking about everyone. Of course, you'll have some women being quiet, don't want to talk, don't know how to express, etc., introverted, etc. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. Absolutely. You'll have different kinds and different personalities. There's no doubt about that. And you'll have other men that will be really open, ready to talk, ready to do this. I know that. But I'm saying in general, and this sometimes is important to see the impact on the marriage relationships, and for women to really understand how things are played out. فَأَثَابَهُمُ اللَّهُ بِمَا قَالُوا. We went in details in that regards. I was really excited to go into this ayah. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تُحَرِّمُوا طَيِّبَاتِ مَا أَحَلَّ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. But here's a question. How did we shift? So it was saying فَأَثَابَهُمُ اللَّهُ بِمَا قَالُوا. Okay, جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار وذلك جزاء المحسنين. And والذين كفروا. What is the ayah that I'm doing? Okay. والذين كفروا وكذبوا بآياتنا أولئك أصحاب الجحيم. That's a pretty straightforward ayah. Those that had disbelieved and those that had denied. Why did it say the disbelief and the denial? Well, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically telling us for those that did not want to believe and they stayed Nasara, and those that had kadhabu and did not want to embrace what was revealed onto the Prophet, then in that situation, the outcome is going to be أولئك أصحاب الجحيم. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Now it goes into يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تحرموا طيبات ما أحل الله لكم. O you who believe, do not forbid the good things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted upon you. وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا. And do not transgress the limits. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Verily, Allah Almighty dislikes those that transgress the limits. وَكُلُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ حَلَالًا طَيِّبًا. And eat from the provisions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you, that is the lawful and the good. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي أَنْتُمْ بِهِ مُؤْمِنُونَ. And have taqwa, that is be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that you would believe in. Let's look into this one. A couple things to say. Number one, the context of it. How did it go from speaking about the ruhban and the qissisin and what their approach was in relationship, of course, to the revelation, and then it goes into talking to us about لا تحرموا طيبات ما أحل الله لكم, because you want to remember that the Christian way of being devout was to mortify the body, and specifically the ruhban, the monks in the monastery. It was to disassociate yourself, ostracize yourself from dunya, disassociate yourself from the different things of entertainment. So that's when this ayah was within this context was telling us, well, I don't want you thinking that you need to somehow think that this is a praise to these types of lifestyles. but you need to understand that as a Muslim, you should not regard something that is halal, something that is good, as haram, but live in moderation. How is it that living in moderation? Said, لا تحرموا, in other words, don't abandon and completely isolate yourself from the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as good. At the same time, don't exceed the limit. Not because something is good, it doesn't mean that you continuously eat and dress and all of and expand in the luxury, because that's going to be transgressing the limit. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. For the Lord Almighty dislikes those that would transgress the limit. In other words, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would like, what the inference is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes the people that are living in moderation. Let's see. What kind of moderation? كُلُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ حَلَالًا طَيِّبًا. Eat from what the provisions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What provisions? Are we talking about eating only? No, we're not just talking about eating. We're talking about consumption. So whether we're speaking about a car, buying a house, probably number of wives, okay, perhaps maybe children, all of that. So that's part of taking in the consumption. So definitely you're not going to be eating your car, but you're going to be, hey, I've got a car and I basically am buying, I don't know, a car that's probably, hey, I can afford, not me personally, but let's say a person can afford a Ferrari, which is like almost $400,000. Well, good for you if that's what you're able to afford and you wanted to buy a Ferrari. Well, okay, you can buy it. But what is that limit where we would say this is i'tida, this is going beyond the limit, or whether this is basically not going beyond the limit? Where is that line, that fine line, that this is considered moderation and this is considered, I guess, going beyond the limit? So that really depends on a couple of things. Number one, it depends on your circumstance. Your circumstance to mean, well, can you afford it? Well, I've got, let's say, $500,000. Yes, but if you're going to buy the Ferrari, which is 400,000, and you only have 500,000, well, then I want to ask you, how much is your house, your rent, your, I guess, your daily expenses, etc.? Are you allocating the right amount of money? Yeah, perhaps $100,000 is probably going to be, if if you're living in a decent home or a simple home, then you're going to have enough money for probably the food, the water, the maybe utilities, etc. But definitely it's going to be needing to be a simple home, because hey, you're allocating this much money for your Ferrari and you're not distributing the money and considering, this much for home, this much for the kids' Islamic schooling, this much for health, this much. Think of DNAIM, Deen, Nafs, Aql, Ird, Mal. So you need to allocate a certain amount of money to preserve your deen and preserve your family's deen. What does it mean to preserve my deen and preserve my family's deen? So if, for example, you want to buy a house, you want to make sure that you're allocating an amount of money where you're living in an area that is good for your deen. So it's not an issue of looking what is cheaper, because if you want to go to cheaper homes, then that's going to be in areas that probably higher crime rate, maybe higher drugs, etc., more drugs, etc., and that's definitely not good for the children's deen and not good for your deen either. Two, for your nafs, enough money, hey, to just, keep an amount where if things go wrong, your health insurance might actually cover, but you also want to keep in mind that your premium might actually, that circumstances might not actually be in your favor. So then you want to think of that. Number 3, so deen, nafs, aql, education, Islamic education. And the Islamic education, definitely, you need to allocate a certain amount of money, whether it's Islamic education or even secular education, to ensure that there's also, because when we're speaking about is education, it's not just Islamic education. Islamic education is, to a certain amount, is basically going to be considered that, yes, it's ضرورة, معلوم من الدين بالضرورة, that you have to learn these basics about Islam. But there are certain things that is also a responsibility to ensure that the children will also probably have the degree to get a job, because that's a darura as well. That's a darura, that's a necessity, to make sure that they're going to be capable of affording perhaps their grades, the Islamic studies, the whatever, the different, I guess, extra curriculum, math and literacy, whatever it is, in order to pave the way to probably making a decent living for them, which is the education part. So allocate some money for that. And then deen, nafs, aql, ird. For the ird, you want to make sure that they're protected. You want to make sure that, of course, perhaps you got the money. If you have the money, you definitely probably want to give your daughter her own separate room to protect her, even, give her an area where she can probably take her time to perhaps unhijab herself or unstrictly dress, of course, even if it's her own maharim. So we're allocating a space for her, for example, or perhaps their siblings are probably sharing a room. How do we share the rooms, etc.? So, allocating an amount of money to make sure that you're putting, I guess, the Islamic principles, if you have the money to give each a room, maybe that's good. But sometimes maybe that's not the right thing. Because sometimes, when you've got another sibling watching another sibling, that's probably important. That way we can have, another child probably there to tell us, hey, my brother's doing this and this in his room. Here's what you need to know, mom, dad, etc. So sometimes we have to do somewhat of a political management in our homes, just to make sure that we have things under control. So now we're looking at DNAIM, and finally المال. And certainly when we're speaking about mal and money management, you definitely don't want to use all your net money. You want to also consider some of that money is generating money. That's why when you would hear, for example, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, that تصدق بجميع ماله, that he had made sadaqah in all the money. It doesn't mean all the money where leaves him at a zero. This is talking about the profit, okay? That he donated the profit, but not donated the net.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, yes, this is
Yeah,
important.
because a lot of people, they just say, oh, you have to give everything, you have to give everything. And then what about your own family? You know what I mean?
Exactly. So there's an area where you have to recognize, like, no, I've got a priority. The priority is basically my family, certainly, my children's health, deen, nafs, aql, ird, mal. This basically comes as my priority, because even the Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith that the biggest sin that you can commit is basically getting تضيع بمن تعول. It's basically or تضيع من تعول is basically to get those that you're responsible for. They're not given their rights, their financial rights. That's the biggest mistake that someone would do. So in that situation, when we're looking at where is al-i'tida and where is moderation, we're looking at, one, you're a factor and your situation is an area to look into. Two, Are you meeting those different areas that are necessary? And 3, there is a difference between these different areas. Let's look into it. What is that? There's a darurat. Let's look into it. There are darurat. Let me write that down. Ad-darurat. And there are at-tahsinat. Okay, at-tahsinat. Where is this? Sorry, I'm sitting in a different position. And al-hajiyat. So I really got to correct my way. Al-hajiyat. Okay, what are those differences? So when you're looking at ad-darurat, you're looking at necessities. The D-N-A-I-M, the things that we just mentioned. Deen, nafs, aql, ird, mal. Okay. التحسينات, الضرورات are things that your life would not go well, let's say it that way, without having these things basically met. التحسينات is different. التحسينات that no, your life would have some hardship. There would be some hardship if these things are not met. الحاجيات would basically be, well, it would definitely make my life easier. Let's actually make that as within our home. الضرورات would be things like water supply. Okay. التحسينيات, well, I can manage living without a microwave, but I would definitely like to have a microwave. Refrigerator right now, is it ضرورات? Is it necessity? Is it التحسينات? What do we consider? Well, I'm not going to die if I don't have a refrigerator for sure. That's for sure. But it would be tahsinat. It would definitely make my life harder because then I would have to figure out how to keep and preserve the food for longer days. It's definitely going to be a lot more expensive than probably the utility bill that I'm paying to make this.
I can't imagine not having a refrigerator. SubhanAllah.
Oh, when we first moved to Malaysia, although we had asked for a furnished place, but they didn't supply the refrigerator until after almost 10, 12 days. And I had to figure things out. And I was remembering how my grandmother used to tell us how they were preserving their foods, and they would put it in a container and put it in water.
Oh,
So
wow.
Yep,
SubhanAllah.
and that's what I did. And it really worked. It really worked. I'll put it in a container, not a plastic container, because plastic traps heat. Okay. But it was putting it in a container that is like an iron container or, a metal container, and then filling the sink with water and then closing that. And that metal container is basically going to start, I guess, getting that that coolness from the water, and it was working. Well, that's how my grandmother used to do it. And yes, so I did it the old way. Okay, الحاجيات, think of it as an extra thing. Hajiyat, well, yeah, it definitely would be a good thing to probably have tables, chairs, just think of that. Just, trying to help you understand this. So what about in Islam? Darurat, would be things that you cannot live without, and certainly it would affect your quality life. Okay, quality life, we're talking about perhaps your deen, nafs, aql, ird, mal. Okay, so that would be darurat. So in other words, when we're looking at, even for the men that want to get married to a second wife, you can't say, well, hey, I would need to increase the number of wives. If you could afford that, well, good for you. But if you're not maintaining the deen, nafs, aql, ird, mal, then it makes no sense to actually go in plus in hajiyat when darurat for your children and your wife perhaps is not met. It goes hand in hand. You've got responsibilities towards your children and your family. Same thing, tahsiniyat. Also give more tahsiniyat. And you're not going to say, well, it's okay, all I need to cover is darurat. No, tahsiniyat, we're going to look into لينفق ذو سعة من سعته. You're going to basically, if you have the money to go for tahsinat, well, increase in tahsinat and make their life easier. Perhaps, yes, a car, a good car, where we don't have to go to the dealer or go to, I guess, fixing our car every once in a while. We've got the money. Make sure that you basically also give them a decent lifestyle. Okay, that's التحسينات. والحاجيات, that's basically now that area where could be relative. And العرف is key. What is العرف? العرف is culture and custom. The culture that basically is within that society. Of course, in America, for example, ضرورات is making perhaps one, a stove, two, a refrigerator. Those are darurat, maybe beds. Those are darurat, considered darurat. But in a place for perhaps like certain countries, a refrigerator, maybe a small refrigerator or a small freezer is probably what they would replace. A stove, yesterday I was watching this documentary, how in certain areas in Pakistan, they would carry balloons of natural gas, and children would carry balloons of natural gas. Imagine that. That would be a killer. But yes, that, I guess in that society, that's to them how they would cover their darura, this most dangerous way. Imagine carrying huge balloons of natural gas. And children would be carrying that. It's like, go buy me natural gas. And what are you doing? You're carrying a balloon of natural gas. And you definitely got to make sure you're not inflating it. Because if you do inflate it, or if it basically pops, that's it. You're just basically going to, one, probably if there's any source of fire, that's it. You're going to be exploding right there. Two, it's definitely going to suffocate you if it's natural gas and you're carrying it. It's definitely going to suffocate you right on the spot. Just imagine that. Wonder how they make sure that this doesn't actually happen. And I wonder how many cases this happened in. So if a woman is married within that culture, just having this balloon is perhaps this darura being met. But if perhaps you as a maybe Western woman getting married to that culture, then you're going to be thinking, well, this isn't darura. How's this darura? You're not capable of meeting the darurat. We're going to tell you, well, we're going to look into the cases. And this is one thing, is that when you get married, just make sure you understand the culture that you're getting married to, because you definitely don't want balloons of natural gas coming into your home and telling you, well, here's our stove for the week. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Al-Qurtubi said, in regards to this ayah, he said that there are 5 different things to say about this ayah. 5 different things. Number 1, the reason why this ayah was revealed. Let's say, al-Tabari had mentioned upon Ibn Abbas that this ayah was revealed because a man comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, "O Prophet of Allah, if I eat meat, I would get into an erection and my lust would overcome me. So I forbid meat upon me." So this ayah was revealed. What was this ayah? This ayah. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تُحَرِّمُوا طَيِّبَاتِ مَا أَحَلَّ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. O you who believe, do not prohibit things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can considered lawful onto you. Why did he actually forbid it? Well, because he felt that it was getting him, I guess, the protein. The protein was somehow, I guess, going into his body, and then that's basically going to result in him going into some erection, and then, of course, getting into a high level of lust, and he felt that that was at the expense of his deen. Well, certainly, if he was not married, then in that situation, to fast is the way to help him in this regards. The hadith are pretty straightforward if he's not married. Because the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, يا معشر الشباب من استطاع منكم الباءة فليتزوج. The Prophet ﷺ said, talking to the men, young men, whoever is capable of getting married, then do so. And the word al-ba'a is actually speaking about the ability to engage in intimacy. Al-ba'a is basically describing exactly what this guy was talking about. Al-intishar and akhadatni shahwati. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ, in order to help them learn if they're not capable of getting married, then he said, فَعَلَيْهِ بِالصَّوْمِ. Then they should get into, I guess, a special type of therapy, which is increasing in fasting. فَعَلَيْهِ بِالصَّوْمِ فَإِنَّهُ لَهُ وِجَاء. فَإِنَّهُ لَهُ وِجَاء, for it is a wija. What is al-wija? Al-wija is basically that it reduces what the amount of protein that's basically, of course, transforming into semen and then probably increasing the person's lust and desire or sexual desire. So the Prophet ﷺ was saying, well, this is basically to help you with this, so reduce the amount. So this ayah is basically saying, well, no, well, not objecting, but to that man that wanted to use this type of therapy and basically had said, haramtul lahm, considered that meat was haram upon me, just in other words, to get better faith. So that's that ayah that was revealed. Let's look at number 1 and just go at the bottom. He said, قال حسن غريب. At-Tirmidhi has his own classification, and whenever he would say Hasanun Gharib, the word Gharib actually is an indication. It doesn't mean strange, that, oh, this is really ironic. No, this is not what it means. The word Gharib is a technical term that At-Tirmidhi would use to indicate that he basically was finding this narration within, I guess, his research for the hadith, but did not find anyone else having this narration or this hadith in particular. So in other words, you would find it in Tirmidhi, but not find it perhaps in other books as to his knowledge. Hasan would tell us that the chain of narration is actually, according to Tirmidhi, that it is to a certain level, that it is authentic, but perhaps the wording is not in the best perfect wording. In other words, one of the narrator's memory in wording the actual way that he had said the story or how it's laid out is probably not in the most accurate way. Okay, let's see. And Al-Qurtubi also said qil. Remember that we said that this is a form of tad'if, a form of indicating that he finds it probably not necessarily having the most accurate resource or accurate, at least, chain of narration. He said it was revealed because a group from the Prophet ﷺ's companions, from them Abu Bakr, Ali, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Abdullah ibn Amr. Let's see, why did you say 2 right there? Okay, Abdullah ibn Umar. So in another copy of another manuscript, it was Abdullah ibn Umar. Okay, not Abdullah ibn Amr. Okay, so you could see that, yeah, sometimes there would be a typo. Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, Salim, Mawla Abi Hudhayfa, Al-Muqdad ibn al-Aswad, Salman al-Farisi, Ma'qil ibn Muqarrin, that they basically had gathered together in the house of Uthman ibn Mad'un. And they all agreed that they would, I guess they wanted to give each other like a support, religious support. And they all agreed that they would fast throughout the day, and throughout the night, they would do qiyam. and they would not sleep on mattresses. They would not eat meat or fat of things, protein basically, and they would avoid women and fragrance, and they would wear al-musuh. Al-musuh, and here he basically told you that it's basically the clothes or the different, fabric that is made of wool. Okay, so that's made of wool. Let's see. And they would avoid things from dunya, and they would yasihu fil ard. So basically just, kind of travel in different parts of the world, and yatarahabu wa yajubbu al-madhakir. And they would do what? Yatarahabu, they would basically choose celibacy. Yajubbu al-madhakir. What is jabb al-madhakir? Jabb al-madhakir actually means that they would castrate themselves. فأنزل الله تعالى هذه الآية. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this ayah in basically in redirecting them and mentoring them, that what it really means to live al-akhirah, it doesn't necessarily mean to isolate yourself from everything in dunya. So let's see. And he said that the stories in this regards are many, and this story that was basically narrated by Sahih Muslim, or by Muslim, that Anas had narrated that a group from the Prophet ﷺ's companions, they basically went to the Prophet ﷺ's homes and basically rooms, and they started asking what the Prophet ﷺ was living his life like in private. So some of them, they basically had said, what basically from the Sahaba, they said, well, we don't get married to women. Other ones, they said, we don't eat meat, avoiding meat. And others, they had said, we don't sleep on mattresses. In other words, wanting to sleep on hard floor. So that's when the Prophet ﷺ praised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, and commenting on the people that had come, that is the Sahaba that had come, and said that they are living their life in a way where they're devout. So the Prophet ﷺ responded to that, to those Sahaba that wanted to say that they're living a life of being devotees and wanting to stay away from dunya. So the Prophet ﷺ commented back and said, I pray and sleep, and I fast and eat, and I get married to women, and whoever goes away from the principles that I am embracing is not part of me. So we know this hadith is in Sahih Muslim. In other words, it's an authentic hadith. Let's see, in al-Bukhari, this story is similar, that three men, they come to the houses and basically the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, and they were asking about the Prophet ﷺ's worship. And when they were told how the Prophet ﷺ, on what he was doing in private, they basically felt that that wasn't much. So they said, and how are we compared to the Prophet ﷺ when his sins were forgiven, the past and the future? So the first one said, well, I would fast, I would pray all night. And the second one said, I would fast always. In other words, and I would never break my fast. And the third one said, I would, that he avoids women and never get married. So why did they say that? Well, they basically thought, well, the Prophet ﷺ, his sins are forgiven, and we can't compare ourselves to him. In other words, we've got sins. In order to be at a high level of being devout, we have to do more than what the Prophet ﷺ is doing and not compare ourselves with him. That's their interpretation. So that's when the Prophet ﷺ had basically comes over, and he said, you are the ones that said such and such, for by Allah, I am the most devout to the Lord Almighty, and I fear him the most. But I would fast and eat, I would pray and sleep, and I would get married to women, and whoever is away from the principles and the teachings that I would teach, then they're not part of me. Let's see another story. Kharraja, that is al-Bukhari and Muslim, they basically had narrated a story about Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, that Uthman bin Mad'un, just an idea about Uthman bin Mad'un. Uthman bin Mad'un migrated to Abyssinia 2 times. So he migrates the first time. His nickname Abu Sa'ib. He migrates to Abyssinia, al-Habasha, and then he hears that a rumor that the people of Mecca had become Muslim, so he comes back. Discovers that it was a false rumor. Then he goes back again. So Uthman bin Mad'un, he actually أراد أن يتبتل. He wanted to become, I guess, a person that was living a lifestyle away from women, and basically التبتل, to live in celibacy. So the Prophet ﷺ had forbid that, and he said وَلَوْ أَجَازَ لَهُ ذَلِكَ لَاخْتَصَيْنَا. And they said, if the Prophet ﷺ had forbid for him to stay away from women, we would have castrated ourselves. But they certainly didn't, because the Prophet ﷺ did not permit that. Let's see. Let's look at the another story. Another story, Abu Imam al-Bahili, he said, we went with the Prophet ﷺ in a battle. In one of the battles, a man passes by a cave, basically, and there was kind of like a water spring coming out, and then he started basically talking to himself to dwell in that cave, and then the water that was flowing within that cave and the vegetation that was growing off around that cave would basically give him the supplies that he needs to avoid dunya. And basically he can just live in that cave. He's got the water and basically the vegetation, use that as the resource. And he basically comes to the Prophet ﷺ and mentions that to the Prophet ﷺ, that this is what this man was thinking, and this is what he's attempting to do. So he said, if the Prophet ﷺ would have allowed him to do that, I would have done it. But the Prophet ﷺ did not allow him to live in this cave away from all this dunya. So he comes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, "O Prophet of Allah, I passed by a cave, and in it is basically everything that I need for water supply, vegetation, and I had basically talked to myself, and in other words, attempted to live in it and avoid everything in this life." And the Prophet ﷺ said, I was not sent with Judaism nor Christianity, but I was sent with monotheism that is in moderation. By the one that has the soul of Muhammad in his hand, going early or coming from fi sabilillah, coming for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is better than everything in this dunya, in this life, and what is in it. And one standing in the row of prayer, that is in the masjid, is better than I guess a secluded prayer equal to 60 years. Well, let's look at this one. Let's see. So this was narrated by Ahmad, but then he had Al-Hafidh. Who's Al-Hafidh? Al-Hafidh is Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar said that this was not an authentic narration. And Abu al-Mughira, who's basically one of the narrators, I guess, didn't really say who. Okay, so just basically wanted to say that this was not an authentic narration. Musnad Ahmad Ali ibn Yazid huwa al-Alhani. Okay, wanted to say who's actually in that chain of narration, wanted to indicate that one. So at least we just know that the idea. Now, how weak is it? We don't really know. But you could see it was narrated by Musnad Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Oh, he wanted to comment on Ali ibn Yazid, this guy. Okay, that's why he was talking about Ali ibn Yazid in that footnote, because he was mentioned who he is. Okay. And Abu al-Mughira, Abd al-Quddus ibn al-Hajjaj al-Khulani. And that's basically a person in the chain of narration. Oh, this was Haddathana Abu al-Mughira. That's why he was talking about Abu al-Mughira, which is a person in the chain of narration, which I basically skipped. Okay, let's continue. Well, even if it's da'if, we don't really know how weak it is, but we do see that there are other hadith that would give us at least the same idea that you can't avoid dunya thinking that's going to get you better in your religion. Let's look at the other narrations. قال علماؤنا, said our scholars had said. When he says علماؤنا, remember he's Maliki, so he's basically saying our Maliki scholars. He said in this ayah and the different ayat that are similar to it, and the different ahadith that basically would infer the same meaning, would basically respond and object on to those that are extreme in their, I guess, Sufi approach or aesthetics. What is zuhd? Is zuhd, number one, is zuhd means to avoid. It comes from the root zahada, which means to avoid, which means to live in avoidance from different things of entertainment. And tasawwuf, there are different meanings to what Sufism really means. Sufism, is it coming from Ahl al-Sufa, the Sahaba that were homeless and living in al-Masjid al-Nabawi, or is Sufi come from the word suf, which means wool? Is that where it's coming from? And here he wanted to object and say, well, those that were extreme in their asceticism or in their Sufi practices, the ones that were extreme, these ayat and these ahadith were to respond to their method that it's going against Islam. But then he says, إذ كل فريق منهم قد عدل عن طريقه وحاد عن تحقيقه. He said, for each and every single group basically went off the path. What path? Well, the path of Islam, basically. وحاد عن تحقيقه, and they couldn't really be committed to it, all the way. Well, that's the same thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had even talked about in Surah Al-Hadid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَرَهْبَانِيَةً ابْتَدَعُوهَا مَا كَتَبْنَاهَا عَلَيْهِمْ إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ. That rahbaniyah, which is celibacy, wasn't something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered them to do, but they were the ones that submitted, at least, or they were the ones that chose this as a way of conviction, not that Islam was ordering them to practice that method of being devout. But then scholars had differences of opinion. So choosing marriage or is marriage sunnah? So you got the Shafi'iyya considered that if you are capable of devoting yourself to seeking ilm, marriage would be sunnah, but it would be best if you were basically devoting yourself to talab al-ilm rather than marriage. The other scholars had considered that no, marriage is sunnah. This is to say that it is recommended that you would get married. Wait a minute. So how do we understand this? Let's look into this. Al-Badri had said it is not permissible on any of the Muslims to forbid anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as permissible upon the mu'mineen, upon the believers. Whether we're speaking about food, or whether we're speaking about clothes, or whether we're speaking about marriage, unless they feared that by engaging in all of that, that it would basically give them a hardship in life. And in other words, the person is probably, wanting to avoid the abundance of things because they wanted to live something simple. They didn't want to grow in adding all these things because they were afraid that it's going to get them too busy. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ had basically rejected celibacy on Ibn Mad'un, and that was proven that there's no good in avoiding something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted, and that what is best and what is in I guess in better commitment is really doing what the Prophet ﷺ had permitted, or what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted for his servants, and what the Prophet ﷺ himself had done, and what he had shown that this is what the nation, the ummah, the Muslim nation should be practicing. In other words, the principle. And certainly that's what even Khulafa al-Rashidin, why does he bring up al-Khulafa al-Rashidun? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, عليكم بسنتي وسنة الخلفاء الراشدين المهديين من بعدي. عضوا عليها بالنواجذ. And this was basically because the Prophet ﷺ said, what you need to stay committed to is basically the sunnati, my sunnah, that is my path, that is the Prophet ﷺ's path, and the path of those that had come in power after the Prophet ﷺ. This was the guidance that the Prophet ﷺ was practicing. And therefore, in the practices that some were engaging in, whether it's in wearing, certain types of material that's probably made of hair or wool, or probably wearing, thick material, or probably cotton, etc., even though they're capable of living or wearing something better, or even thinking that by eating old bread or eating foods that are probably lentils, more of those kind of things, and avoiding meat, for example, in order to, I guess, preserve themselves, at least the men, from needing women and needing marriage, that's not necessarily what Islam was considering as what it means to be in moderation. So what is the moderation? The moderation, let's see here. I want to take you to one thing, which is when you're looking at the scholars of Tazkiyah, let's see. What al-Tabari wanted to say in, hold on, let me just, I guess, before I get into the Tazkiyah part. He said, if someone would think that it is best and that it would somehow be a better option to choose to probably choose wearing thick clothes, or perhaps harsh material, or eat things that are not necessarily the best, in other words, not luxurious foods, and perhaps leaving and avoiding things and leaving these for the people that are in need. He said that people would, this person would basically have a wrong interpretation. For what is prior is that you would start with fixing your situation first. And that would give you the ability to make yourself obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, don't get yourself hungry because you want to donate and feed others. That's what al-Tabari is saying. He said, your priority, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, you are the first priority. And if you are healthy, if you are strong and fit, then what that is going to be doing is that you're going to be capable of worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and meeting, I guess, the ability to do the requirements. And he said there's nothing more harmful on the body than rotten foods. So it makes no sense to go and eat rotten foods because you wanted to somehow be a simple and humble person. He said there's nothing more dangerous than eating rotten foods, because that's going to basically affect your brain. It's going to affect your ability and your health. And then, of course, it's going to affect your ability to live in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's see. A man comes to Al-Hasan al-Basri. Al-Hasan al-Basri, remember, one of the tabi'een, and his
So what
nanny.
you're saying is it's better to waste than make yourself sick with rotten food.
No, it's consume in moderation. Don't get yourself sick and thinking that I'm basically being humble. No, you're not being humble by getting yourself sick. That's what we're saying. And your responsibility is towards yourself. That's your priority, and your children. But to donate for X, Y, and Z when your kids need the food, no. Your kids are your first priority, not the other people. If you have extra, then certainly go and donate it. But your kids are your first priority. That's what we're saying. You are the first priority, because you want to make sure that you stay fit and healthy. That's basically laying out, I guess, what it means to be in conviction. Laying out what is a priority and what is moderation. So it makes no sense to put your family in a situation where they're probably in need, probably getting sick, probably, going in harsh situations, just because you want to include other people. So you want to make sure that your needs and your children's needs and your family's needs are met first. And then if you had extra, then we would say, okay, now you can look into the other needs. Okay, let's see. A man comes to Al-Hasan al-Basri, and he said, I had a neighbor who did not eat al-faludaj. I'll just give you an idea about al-faludaj. Al-faludaj, the cream of wheat? So the cream of wheat, they would basically put it in water, put some sugar on it or honey, and that's basically al-faludaj. It was considered like, extravagant foods. Okay. So kind of like what we would consider like halal bismeed. Yeah. So anyhow, and he said, why doesn't he eat that sweet thing, that sweet dish? And he said, because he was afraid that he would not be capable of thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. So Al-Hasan al-Basri said, well, does he drink cold water? And he said, yes. Then he responded, well, your neighbor is ignorant, because the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in cold water is even more of a blessing than this cream of wheat sweet dish. In other words, it's not being more religious by putting yourself in harsher situations. So that's that area. But here's one thing. I want to take you into that part. I know I'm kind of extending my time right there, but I can't miss out on those ideas. Let's look at this. Ibn al-Arabi. This isn't Ibn Arabi, the Sufi Futuhat Makkiyya guy. This is Ibn al-Arabi, the Maliki scholar from Ishbiliya. He basically said, our scholars had said that this deen is based on strong basis. And wealth is not forbidden, yet if it affects the person's deen, and then if il-haram becomes so prevalent, then in that situation, to avoid all of that and avoid the different type of extravagance and I guess the different types of trying to get into entertainment, then that would be better. If they find what is halal, إذا وجد الحلال فحال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أفضل وأعلى. So if halal was there, then the situation, what the Prophet ﷺ was in, would definitely be better. In other words, what is Ibn al-Arabi here choosing? Ibn al-Arabi was saying, well, we're looking at the circumstances that surround us. If everybody was getting into this dunya, then you're going to feel compelled and intimidated to get into dunya. So Ibn al-Arabi was taking a different approach and saying, well, what would be better is that when everyone is living in this life of dunya, then what's better would actually be taking an approach where you're isolating yourself from all of that. Let's see, Al-Muhallab ibn Abi Sufra. He said the reason why the Prophet ﷺ had forbidden celibacy was in order to basically مُكَثِرٌ بِأُمَّتِهِ الْأُمَمِ. So on Judgment Day, he would basically be happy about how the abundance of numbers of the Muslims, the Muslim nation, would be on Judgment Day. وأنه في الدنيا مقاتل بهم طوائف الكفار. That in this dunya, of course, the number of Muslims would basically add on to the power of Muslims to face the disbelievers, and on Judgment Day, they would be the ones to fight the Dajjal. And the Prophet ﷺ wanted to encourage marriage in order to encourage in the number of Muslims that are out there. So this is definitely focusing on celibacy and that comment on it. So what about لا تعتدوا? لا تعتدوا, well, don't transgress the limit. But what is al-i'tida? Al-i'tida is transgressing the limit, meaning going beyond what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered as halal. And therefore, we're talking about both extremes, two extremes. You could be an extreme and commit a transgression by probably engaging in an abundant amount, and in abundance of entertainment and abundance of dunya. And there could be another i'tida where you're not putting enough, or you're exceeding the limit. You're putting too much of it, or you're not putting the amount to get the amount that is necessary for your life. So let's say right there, how do we understand, let's say, wanted to actually get to this point, but I could see the time definitely went beyond my time. The point that I wanted to get to is definitely coming in right here, but you can see that I'm going to take you. Are you guys going to be patient? Or should I just stop right here? What do you say? Should we continue tomorrow? I'm pretty cool. I'm pretty cool either way. I can continue tomorrow or can stop right now.
Go ahead.
Go ahead? Okay. So let's see. Let's see what other people are writing. You can keep going. Okay. If the person, let's see, من حرم على نفسه طعاما أو شرابا أو أمة له. If a person forbids something that is halal on themselves, they basically said, well, from now on, this is haram on me. I'm not going to use this anymore. This is probably, let's say, food. They're like, I'm basically not going to eat anymore. I'm going to live to work on my deen by avoiding all of that. And they said it was haram. In that situation, is that going to be like an oath? Or is that, if you say that that's an oath, that would, in terms of, let's say, marriage, if, let's say, this man said, you know what, this woman my wife is too attractive for me. She's constantly, I guess, keeping me away from my qiyam al-layl, and I'm going to start avoiding my wife. She's going to be like my sister from now on. Then in that situation, that is dhihar. Okay? That's dhihar. They would have to fast for 2 months in a row, or they would have to feed 60 people. But what if it was just an inner thought? Or let's say food. He basically said every time I would eat this kind of food, it would basically put me to sleep. And basically said, you know what, I'm not going to eat this again. All right? And that's it. Just by saying I'm not going to eat this again, Some scholars regarded that that's an oath, and other scholars had considered no, it's the issue about practice. But I'm not going to go into details about that. Preponderant is that it would not be considered as haram for them to eat from it, all right? But if they considered that if they had eaten from it, or they basically go against what they had said that they were going to be committed, and it would definitely be haram to even stay committed to something that is against the sunnah of the Prophet. Okay. And in that situation, just for saying that, then they would have to pay the expiation. Okay. And certainly, al-Qurtubi, being Maliki, didn't agree with the Hanafi approach. And he said, well, this ayah is responding and refuting to that claim. So then, of course, is it yameen? Is it an oath, or is it not an oath? We're going to discuss that later. But this is the part that I really wanted to talk about right here. كُلُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ حَلَالًا طَيِّبًا. Yes, eating and getting into some form of, I guess, joy in eating, drinking, dressing, and perhaps cars and transportation. And this isn't necessarily exclusive to eating. This is talking about consuming different areas of what probably is making your life easy. But of course, it was emphasizing on the food because perhaps that's the most thing that we would see. But this would be exclusive to all the different things that are considered provisions. Okay, well, what about in relationship? This is what I wanted to get to. The scholars in, I guess, doing this type of mentorship, should we avoid good things, or should we get a certain amount of these good things? Let's maybe make it onto a cake. The example, a hypothetical situation, cake. Let's just say you love chocolate cake. Okay, but one thing, chocolate cake, when you eat it, you just get into, I guess, a sugar rush, and you just get into a situation where it'll probably make you lose some focus on probably attending a class or things like that, and you just get, I guess, too excited. Let's just assume, hypothetically. It'd be really funny if somebody's like that, but anyhow. All right, let's just assume. Okay,
You're making us want cake.
Sorry about that. Chocolate cake is not my favorite anymore, so I can talk about it. All right, so let's say when he said فَمَذَاهِبُ النَّاسِ فِي تَمْكِينِ النَّفْسِ مِنْهَا مُخْتَلِفَةٌ. He said the different approach, when he talks about الناس here, he's not talking about people, but he's actually talking about the different approach that different scholars of tazkiyah. So the first group, they basically said the way that is better for your tazkiyah and learning how to grow in your faith or grow in your inner purification, spiritual purification. The first group of scholars, they would basically take the approach of avoiding your nafs from doing such things. Let's say eating a chocolate cake, for example, and that what you are supposed to be doing is submitting your nafs and telling your nafs you're not going to get what it wants in order to later on be capable of controlling it. And then that way, his own nafs would not control him or her, because if you're going to give it everything that it desires, then that person is going to be basically like a hostage to his own desires, and then they wouldn't know how to control it. Let's say an example that you would see stories where, for example, Abu Hazm, he would come across maybe walking in the market, and then he would come across certain fruits he would see, and then he would say, well, you're going to get that in Jannah. Okay, let's see. The other types of scholars, their method was different. The other types of scholars, they said no, giving the nafs, an amount that is halal is basically better, and because it would give it a certain amount of feeling stable rather than feeling the urge to want it. And once it basically lives in a certain level of stability, it would probably get the power, the empowerment, and probably it would be capable of learning and be within, I guess, your approach rather than it overcoming you. Then in that situation, you're basically giving it an amount of time, an amount of, I guess, of that dunya, and not necessarily, I guess, removing the desire completely, because you're not battling it, but you're giving an amount that is necessary for it to live a certain level of stability rather than a level of turbulence. Let's see, the other type of scholars of Tazkiyah, they said no, it's in moderation. If you were to give it sometimes, then prevent it at others, then that situation, it's basically it's basically including both approaches in what you're doing. Sometimes you're letting your nafs recognize how your grip on it is strong enough to prevent it from wanting dunya and controlling you. And the other way, to basically having the moment what sometimes it's okay, we'll eat a chocolate cake or we'll eat this, and living that moderation. And sometimes, yes, I'll eat this, but other times I have to say, you've had enough. You're not going to get more. And look at your weight. That is actually a sign that you're getting too much of it. And you got to do, I guess, portion control, maybe calorie control, or maybe the dunya. Let's look at your the amount you're spending probably on food, the amount you're spending perhaps on clothes, the amount of this, and just look at the average. Are you overspending? So this is the third approach. They're like, oh, yes, you're not going to necessarily tell yourself, don't buy anything, and say, oh, just like that Abu Hazm, he was saying, oh, you're going to get this in dunya, so I can't give you any of it. And the last one is التوسط. Wallahu a'lam, التوسط is actually best, because if you're going to avoid completely, then that's going to take you into a fitna. And I had seen that. I know it differs from one person to another. Some people, if you would give them a small amount, they could easily get into addiction and they don't know how to stop themselves. So we would definitely take the first approach as best, basically in mentoring their nafs. So the person has to really know where they're at in order to know how to give the right, let's say, approach in mentoring their nafs. Should they avoid it completely? Should they give a good amount? Should they live in moderation? Sometimes give them that dunya. Other times, no, you've had enough, and live that moderation. Then in that situation, just understanding these different approaches. And many times people are confused. They're like, well, I've heard, let's say, this sheikh say that, and that sheikh that say this, and I'm really confused. I'm just laying out the different tazkiyah approaches that you would find. Perhaps maybe Abu al-Ata al-Secondary giving you this, and perhaps maybe another scholar, Ibn al-Qayyim, giving you a different approach, and perhaps Ibn al-Jawzi giving you a different approach, and you're really confused. We're just laying out the different approaches and letting you know that there are different methods that different scholars might use in how they would mentor that tazkiyah for the nafs in order to keep it and keep it on the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and maintain it within the path that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had designated, that it would direct you to the purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically drawn for you, that it would lead you to Jannah. So then in that situation, you want to keep in mind that what could be a fitna to me might not be a fitna to you. Okay? That's why the ayah قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. And at the same time, you would see in Surah Al-Nazi'at that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. And those that feared the position of the Lord Almighty and they prevented their nafs from controlling them, then that's how they would get to Jannah. That's the whole idea of halal haram. The whole idea of fiqh is giving you the principles of guidance on how you can control and mentor your nafs from it controlling you to you controlling it. That's the whole idea of fiqh. Okay? That's the whole idea of fiqh in a nutshell. And this is extremely important to understand, that it differs from one person to another. And two, it's important to consider your situation and how your nafs and what it struggles with. One person, their struggle might be in maybe popularity. Another person, their struggle is in appearance. She just likes to stand out in appearance, that she's just basically looking attractive, looking great, etc. Another person, no, it's a shopaholic. She just likes shopping. Another person, their fitna is in food. Another person, their fitna is in talking. She just likes to continuously talk and talk and talk. And this talking is at the expense of dhikr, for example. So she has to figure out what that fitna is and what's leading that and what's making that fitna grow stronger and what approach she's supposed to be taking in making sure that she's controlling her nafs and not her nafs controlling her. So this is it. Inshallah, we'll continue, inshallah, tomorrow in this ayah. But guess what? لا يأخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم. But al-Qurtubi said, فيه 47 مسألة. 40 different points to talk about, 47 different points to talk about this ayah. We're not going to go in all of them because definitely I don't want all of you, I guess, flying away. But I'm excited still. We'll talk about oath and we'll talk about different things, but I'm not going to go over the 74 or 47, sorry, the 47 different issues, but we'll summarize the most important points, inshallah. So this is it. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilaik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I know we definitely went beyond our time, but I couldn't stop. I guess everybody's like, well, you already went beyond your time anyways. Okay, fair enough.